There is a message meant for you today, and it matters more than you might realize. Take a breath before you keep reading, because what follows comes from a place of distance, quiet, and buried regret. And it's reaching you now because timing matters here. The person you're thinking of has been carrying something inside for far longer than they've ever let on, longer than you probably know. They didn't simply wake up one day and stop caring. They didn't move on as easily as they made it look. What actually happened is that they buried feelings they weren't ready to face, and buried feelings never really disappear. They sit there quietly building pressure until they finally break through. What's coming from them right now is born out of panic, not strength. They are not calm. They are not at peace. Somewhere inside, in their mind, their heart, their sense of who they are, something has come loose. Something shifted recently. Maybe they saw something that reminded them of you, heard your name somewhere, or maybe life just got quiet enough that the truth they'd been avoiding finally got too loud to ignore. Whatever it was, it woke something up in them, and now they're facing something that genuinely terrifies them, the real possibility of losing you for good. That realization didn't arrive gently. It hit them late at night, in the moments when distraction stopped working, when scrolling their phone felt hollow, when laughing with other people felt like performance. The silence finally cornered them into answering questions they'd been dodging for a long time. And what they noticed hurt. Nobody else feels like you did. Nobody else listens the way you listened or understood them without making them feel judged for it. Being around you felt safe without ever feeling like too much. That's when the urgency crept in, and urgency like this doesn't only come from love. Sometimes it comes from the fear of losing something you can't get back. If they could speak without fear or pride getting in the way, they'd admit they should have acted long before now. They assumed there'd be more time. They never expected you to actually pull back. They didn't realize how much their silence would cost you. They're only now understanding that choosing to do nothing was still a choice, and that choice is exactly what cost them the closeness you once shared. They regret not showing up when it counted, not speaking up when you needed to hear from them, not being brave enough to give you the truth when you needed it most. Back then, staying quiet felt like the safer option. Keeping distance felt like a kind of control. They convinced themselves that avoiding things was strength, but avoidance always comes with a bill eventually. The truth is, they struggle to show their feelings, not because they don't have any, but because they feel far too much and never learned how to handle it. Opening up felt like a risk of rejection. Being vulnerable felt like losing power. Admitting how they actually felt meant confronting parts of themselves they weren't ready to look at. Carl Jung once said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we'll call it fate. That's essentially the life this person has been living without realizing it, letting fear and pride make their decisions for them, letting silence speak on their behalf. And now those choices have caught up with them in ways they can no longer pretend not to notice. They can feel you changing. This part matters. They can sense that you're not who you used to be. Your energy is different. The way you respond to things has shifted. Your silence now carries more weight than your words ever did. You might still care on some level, but you're no longer chasing them for answers. You're no longer over-explaining yourself, and you're no longer sitting in sadness waiting around. This scares them, because they leaned on your patience and your kindness more than they probably should have. They assumed you'd always be there, staying open while they stayed closed off. They figured you'd wait indefinitely, but they never considered that you might reach a point where you finally chose yourself instead. They feel it now. What they're actually afraid of losing isn't just you, it's the way you made them feel truly seen. They're losing an emotional home they never learned how to take care of properly. They're realizing that not every connection gets a second chance, and not every bond can simply be rebuilt. They keep asking themselves whether they just destroyed the one relationship that actually mattered. That question follows them into quiet moments, into every attempt to move on, into every comparison they make between you and anyone else, where the difference is obvious immediately. That's where all this urgency is coming from. It's not about control. It's the awareness that time is running out. They sense that if they wait any longer, you'll be gone emotionally, not just physically. They feel a door closing, not with a slam, but with a quiet, soft click. And that kind of closing is the most dangerous kind, because once it shuts, it rarely opens again easily. They want to reach out and apologize properly without excuses attached, but fear keeps holding them back. What if it's too late? What if you don't care anymore? So they hesitate. They write messages and delete them. They rehearse conversations in their head that never actually happen, while the urgency inside them just keeps growing. None of this is a promise that everything gets magically fixed. It's a confession. They're admitting they were wrong to take you for granted, and they're scared they hurt you more deeply than they intended. Realizing the truth this late is painful, because it arrives right when they no longer have any control over the outcome. What actually matters here is what this means for you. This isn't telling you what to do. It's not asking you to wait around. It's simply stating the truth. You mattered far more than they ever showed you, and your absence has spoken louder than your presence ever did. What you choose to do next is entirely yours to decide. Real strength never has to rush just because someone else has hit a moment of panic. And it's worth remembering that urgency doesn't automatically mean someone is actually ready to change. This person feels this way because they're finally facing the consequences of their own choices. They're replaying old memories now, seeing them through a different lens, the lens of loss instead of ego. They remember how you used to check on them, how you tried to understand them instead of blaming them. They're realizing you were meeting them at a depth they weren't emotionally prepared for. Jung also spoke about the weight we carry from our past, and this person has been living a life where they avoided growing up emotionally. Now even your silence makes them feel exposed. Silence used to feel like breathing room to them. Now it feels like real distance. They can sense that you're no longer waiting for them to catch up, no longer shaping your life around their confusion. They're afraid you've found peace without them, that you no longer need answers or a dramatic confrontation, that you simply moved forward. That terrifies them because they were relying on you always being available. They see now that you were never asking for perfection, just for consistency and presence. They chose comfort instead of courage, and used needing space as a convenient excuse to hide. But readiness is a choice, and they didn't choose it back when you were offering them your heart. That realization stings because the offer isn't sitting there in the same way anymore. They notice the shift in how you talk now, how you've stopped trying to prove your worth to them. They assumed you'd wait forever simply because you were gentle, without understanding that even gentleness has its limits. Now they're caught between wanting you back and dreading the actual work it would take to keep you. That's exactly why their energy feels so unsettled. They're not at peace, because what they're doing doesn't match what they're feeling. They picture themselves becoming better, but reality demands they actually follow through. And that's precisely where fear stops them cold. They're scared of letting you down all over again. You should know something important here. You're no longer waiting around for words. You're looking for real change, and you've already done the work of sitting with your own pain long enough to find clarity. They're only just beginning that process now. Even if they eventually speak up, things can't simply snap back to how they were, because trust doesn't work that way once it's been damaged. They're standing at a doorway right now. Behind them is the comfort of hiding. In front of them is the risk of honesty. They know that doing nothing means losing you completely, but reaching out means finally having to look at themselves honestly. You can sense this shift happening. They're confronting their own actions, and you're no longer standing in the middle of it with them. You've already moved forward. Loss tends to whisper before it ever screams, and they're hearing that whisper now. They feel it every time they realize they no longer know where they stand with you. They watch you moving forward, not out of anger, but from a place of clarity, and that forces them to face the truth they've spent so long running from. Jung once said that what we resist persists. This person resisted the connection you offered and the effort it would have required, and now that pressure has grown too large to keep ignoring. They're not just afraid of losing you. They're afraid of what that loss says about who they are. They know, deep down, that this was never about bad timing. It was about fear. They remember every moment they could have been honest and chose silence instead. And those small moments now feel unbearably heavy. They see that you didn't just walk away one day. You slowly rebuilt your life around the reality they kept handing you. You stopped filling in the gaps for them. You stopped trading your own peace for their attention. You changed quietly, and you changed on purpose. They notice you no longer lean in, no longer try so hard to be understood. Your calm is what unsettles them most, because calm means your mind is made up. You're no longer fighting to make things different. They're learning that their uncertainty can no longer be used to keep you waiting around. You're standing firmly in self-respect now, and that changes everything about how this plays out. They're afraid to reach out because deep down, they still aren't ready. They want to tell you they cared, but they know that arriving at the truth this late doesn't undo the damage that's already been done. An apology without a real change in behavior doesn't restore trust on its own. They're caught between the person who hides and the person who actually grows, and there's no real growth without some pain involved. Right now, they're sitting in exactly that pain. They realize you were a mirror reflecting their own potential back at them, and they turned away from what they saw. Now, they feel disconnected from themselves. They're beginning to understand that delaying growth was never the same as avoiding it entirely. It just means it hurts more whenever it finally arrives. They admire the fact that you didn't fall apart after they left. You grew instead. You chose yourself, and that earns their respect whether they say it out loud or not. They know they can't come back to you with half an effort anymore. They're struggling because they don't want to return as the same person they were before. But they genuinely don't know who they are without the walls they've built. Still, their struggle doesn't obligate you to open back up again. Their urgency doesn't determine your worth. You've become exactly who you were meant to be without needing anyone's permission to get there. You're not being cold, you're simply being clear. Growth changes who we're actually compatible with. This person can sense that the version of you who used to do anything for them is gone. Perspective comes from walking through disappointment and coming out the other side, and that's exactly what's changed you. They know you'd listen calmly now if they reached out, and somehow that's more intimidating to them than anger ever was. Because calm shows you're actually in control of yourself. You've transformed, and that transformation can't simply be undone to make someone else more comfortable. They want closeness without having to change the difficult parts of themselves. And that internal conflict is exactly what's keeping them stuck. They know you no longer need their excuses in order to feel okay. You walked away because caring alone was never going to be enough. You needed someone who actually showed up. They're grieving the version of you that used to wait patiently for them. That grief is forcing them into honesty, though it's arriving far later than it should have. They're starting to accept their part in the distance between you, but they still don't know whether reaching out would help or make things worse. They're afraid because once the truth is finally out in the open, there's no more hiding behind vagueness. You're not someone they can be evasive with anymore. You're grounded now, and it was never your job to rescue them from their own discomfort or make any of this easier on them. Your job is simply to honor the progress you've already made. You're not reacting to their panic. You're waiting for the right thing, not just any resolution. It might feel good to hear that someone finally recognizes your worth, but that recognition was never actually the goal. The goal is what you choose to build with the life you have now. Panic is not the same thing as being ready to actually change. Don't let compassion pull you back into something that was never healthy to begin with. You've already reached a place where you stopped waiting and started truly living. They can sense that you're operating from a place of self-trust now. You lived through the loneliness of loving someone who wasn't fully present, and that experience taught you the difference between a spark and real lasting safety. They're only just now learning that a relationship takes actual effort, not just feelings. They're not a villain in this story, but you were never responsible for fixing them either. You already chose yourself. If they ever do speak up, you'll hear them out with a clear head, and you'll know whether they've genuinely changed or whether they're simply afraid of losing you. You don't have to walk backward to help anyone move forward. You were never asking for too much. You are asking for the basic elements of a real relationship. If there's a future here, it has to happen on the level you've grown into now. And if there isn't, you keep moving forward with the peace you've already found. Walk forward with respect for yourself. There's one more layer to this that might be the hardest thing for them to face. As they sit inside this silence, they're beginning to understand that the version of you they once knew is gone for good. You haven't simply moved on, you've been remade. From a distance, they're watching you build a life that no longer has a space carved out in the shape of them. For a long time, they comforted themselves with the idea that they were the main character in your story, that your sadness, your waiting, your hope, all revolved around them. But now they see the story kept going without them, and they've become a minor character in it. That realization is a real hit to their ego, but it's also exactly what's forcing them to grow. They're seeing that your happiness isn't about them at all. It's because you finally decided your own well-being mattered more than their potential. They miss the way you used to look at them, but they're also unsettled by the way you look at the world now, with eyes that see straight through games and a heart that no longer settles for scraps. They're wrestling with the possibility that they may have been a lesson for you, while you were the missed opportunity for them. They're starting to understand that you didn't just give up on things, you leveled up. That's why their energy feels so heavy right now. They're mourning the version of you they lost, while realizing they aren't yet strong enough to meet who you've become. They're learning that love was never something you could store on a shelf and pull down whenever it was convenient. It's a living thing that needs a safe environment to survive. And that environment disappeared the moment they refused to help build it with you. Watching you from a distance, they're learning that real power was never about holding someone's heart while they wait around. It's about being strong enough to walk away when that heart isn't being honored properly. You've become that person, and while they're still tangled up in what-ifs, you're already living in what actually is. The urgency they feel is simply a sign that they're catching up to a reality you accepted a long time ago. They're only now feeling the full weight of the space they left behind. But remember, their awakening belongs to them. It was never meant to be your destination. You've already arrived somewhere peaceful. Keep standing in your truth. Keep honoring your boundaries. Keep walking toward the light of your own growth. You've already done the hard work, and now everything else is simply catching up to the version of you who already knows her own worth. They're arriving at one final heavy realization. The distance between you two isn't just a pause anymore. It's a mirror reflecting back every single time they chose to stay absent. For a long time, they assumed they still held the key to your heart, free to return whenever they finally felt ready. But looking at you now, they understand you didn't just change the lock. You moved somewhere else entirely. They're feeling the cold reality that arrives once a person stops being an option and starts becoming a memory instead. This is the stage where their regret starts turning into genuine respect for your strength. They're amazed at how you handled their inconsistency without becoming bitter about it. They see that your grace was never a weakness. It was a sign of how much you were actually willing to give. And they feel the sting of knowing they never match that same energy. The urgency they're feeling now is also tangled up with a fear of your total indifference. They're terrified you've reached a point where you no longer even feel the need to forgive them because you've simply moved past the entire situation. They keep replaying your last few conversations, searching for traces of the person who used to care so intensely, but all they find is someone steady, balanced, and whole. That creates a quiet kind of panic in them, like shouting into a canyon and hearing nothing echo back. They're beginning to understand that the real consequence of their silence was never your anger. It was your peace. Your peace proves you don't need them in order to be happy, and that might be the hardest lesson they've ever had to learn. They are also arriving at one of the most uncomfortable realizations a person can face. The distance between the two of you was never created by fate alone. It was not simply bad timing, a demanding career, difficult circumstances, or some invisible force that kept your lives from aligning. Those explanations once provided comfort because they allowed responsibility to remain scattered and undefined. But eventually, those stories begin to lose their power. What remains is a quieter, more difficult truth. They have to stand before themselves without excuses and acknowledge that the greatest obstacle was their own fear. They were not emotionally prepared to offer the kind of openness, vulnerability, and consistency that real love required. They cared, perhaps more deeply than they admitted, but caring and showing up are not the same thing. Love asks for courage, and courage was the very thing they struggled to find. Looking into that truth is painful because it forces them to see not only what they lost, but what they repeatedly chose not to protect. They remember the conversations they avoided, the messages they never sent, the moments they withdrew instead of leaning closer, and the opportunities where honesty would have built a bridge instead of another wall. One memory alone might be easy to dismiss. Hundreds of them become impossible to ignore. Slowly, the narrative changes. Instead of believing the relationship simply failed, they begin to understand that fear quietly shaped many of the decisions that led them here. That realization changes a person from the inside out. Whether they ever speak those words to you or keep them locked away forever, they cannot unknow what they now see. Self-awareness has a peculiar quality. Once it arrives, it refuses to disappear. Every future relationship becomes a reminder of the lessons they learned too late. Every genuine connection is measured against the one they allowed to slip away. The growth that follows is rarely dramatic. It unfolds in silence, through reflection, regret, and the gradual dismantling of old emotional defenses. It is uncomfortable work, but it is real work. The greatest turning point comes when they recognize that the pain of losing you has finally become heavier than the fear of changing themselves. For so long, remaining emotionally guarded felt safer than risking disappointment. Distance felt manageable, vulnerability felt dangerous. But eventually those calculations reverse. The loneliness created by self-protection becomes more painful than the possibility of being hurt. In that moment, growth is no longer optional. It becomes necessary. They also begin to understand something they overlooked while you were still together. Truly meaningful connections are astonishingly rare. Many people spend years meeting countless individuals without ever encountering someone who genuinely sees them, challenges them, inspires them, and creates emotional safety all at once. Those relationships are not ordinary. They cannot simply be replaced because another person appears. Yet fear often creates the illusion that what is extraordinary is somehow endlessly available. They assumed another opportunity would come. They assumed you would always remain within reach. They treated permanence as though it were guaranteed. Only after the distance becomes real do they recognize what was actually standing in front of them. What they once viewed as ordinary now appears extraordinary in hindsight. The conversations that felt routine become precious memories. The comfort of your presence becomes something they search for in people who cannot recreate it. The emotional safety they quietly relied upon suddenly becomes impossible to replace. They realize that genuine connection was never something they could simply find again. It was something they failed to nurture when they had the chance. Now they are left holding the very silence they once used as protection. Silence once felt powerful because it delayed difficult conversations. It postponed vulnerability. It avoided conflict. But silence is an unreliable shield. Given enough time, it transforms into isolation. The empty space they created no longer feels peaceful. It echoes. Every unanswered message, every missed opportunity, every conversation that never happened gradually returns to them. What once seemed like emotional control now feels like profound loneliness. Meanwhile, your journey has quietly become something entirely different. For you, the hardest battle was never convincing another person to choose you. It was remembering to choose yourself after experiencing disappointment. That battle required strength that few people ever see. It required waking up on difficult mornings and continuing forward despite uncertainty. It required resisting the temptation to chase answers that could never truly heal you. It required trusting your own worth even when someone else's actions made you question it. That is why your victory has nothing to do with whether they eventually return. Your victory is that you found yourself again. You are no longer living according to someone else's emotional readiness. Your happiness no longer depends on whether another person overcomes their fears. You have stepped out of the waiting room and back into your own life. Instead of sitting beside a closed door hoping it opens someday, you have begun walking toward countless open ones. That shift changes everything because your future is no longer suspended by someone else's indecision. Think of this as the confirmation your heart quietly needed all along. Your intuition was not misleading you. The inconsistencies you sensed were real. The emotional distance you felt was not imagined. The love you offered was genuine, and so was the effort you invested. Walking away was not giving up. It was recognizing that love cannot survive where only one person carries its weight. Sometimes leaving is not abandoning love. It is protecting it from becoming something that slowly destroys your own spirit. With that understanding comes an extraordinary kind of freedom. You no longer have to explain your value to anyone. You no longer have to persuade someone that you are worthy of consistency, kindness, honesty, or commitment. The people who are capable of loving you well will never require a presentation proving why you deserve respect. They will recognize it naturally because healthy love does not begin with convincing. It begins with mutual recognition. You can also release the hope that an apology will somehow repair everything. Apologies have value when they are sincere, but they cannot rewrite the past or restore the years spent waiting for someone to become emotionally available. The closure you seek has never truly belonged to another person's words. True healing begins when you reclaim yourself, transforming heartbreak into wisdom and opening the door to healthy mutual love rooted in clarity, peace, and self-worth.